Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to prove to you that former Archbishop Carlo Vigano has joined a demonic cult. It didn't just happen overnight, so I'm going to go through the progression, and by the end of the video, I'll have made my case. But just like the secular media in America is being exposed for lying and hiding Joe Biden's issues, most of us Americans seen it for ourselves, and they told us we were crazy. These were cheap fakes. This was AI. You know, the media kept covering for him. Like 2 weeks before the famous debate, NBC, ABC, CBS, were all their talking heads were saying how sharp Joe Biden is, the smartest guy in the room, and now the same people got the knives out and they want to throw him overboard, not because of his mental illness, you know, whatever it is, but more so because they think they're going to lose. If he was winning, they would just keep hiding him. So in the same way that's happening, there's some in the Catholic media, YouTubers, that pretended for years Vigano was this great hero, and they're about to be exposed. And I imagine they'll start slowly saying they didn't know, or he went too far, and then eventually they'll disassociate from him. But I have a lot of subscribers that email me, tell me they have friends and family that still believe Vigano is some sort of hero. So I'm just going to give you the facts. You know, facts are a stubborn thing, you know. Some people make their decisions based on emotions, but being a Catholic Christian, we're taught faith and reason. We have to reason, critically think. So, for right off the bat, I was actually going to do another video, but it kind of coincides with what's happening here. And I may still do it, about why priests today are much more conservative than priests 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. So this is from the Pillar. It says the share from 2023, and then I just read a new one from the New York Times. I'll share with you in a minute. The share of new U.S. Catholic priests identifying as theologically progressive has fallen so low that the phenomena, I can never say that word, has all but vanished, according to a report published Tuesday. The 18-page report issued by the Catholic University said that when priests were asked to describe their theological outlook on a spectrum from very conservative / orthodox to very progressive, none of those ordained after 2020 described themselves as very progressive. The report included a graph showing that the proportion of priests who identified as somewhat progressive or very progressive fell from almost 70% from those ordained in 1965. So the pre-Vatican II priests, 1965 to 1969, the pre-Vatican II priests, 70% of them said they were very progressive or somewhat progressive. 2020 or later, less than 5%. The same with political liberalism. The pre-Vatican II priests were much more liberal. The priests today consider themselves much more conservative politically. Also, recently, the New York Times said the priests that have been ordained in the last 10 years, just like 2 days ago, New York Times came out with this, priests ordained in the last 10 years are way more conservative than the priests of 50 years ago, politically and theologically. Now, this kind of coincides. Now, I'm going to be talking about sexual abuse and homosexuality a little bit here. So I just want to qualify this in case you haven't seen my videos. You know, the media likes to, and the Protestants that are anti-Catholic, like to throw the sexual abuse crimes of the Catholic Church in our face. And they were horrible. They were horrific. That was the greatest crisis this church ever faced. The greatest crisis. You know, I hear people saying we're in the greatest crisis because the Pope's not as traditional as I would like them to be. No, the greatest crisis was raping little children. That was the greatest crisis. And Boz Tjidovin, Billy Graham, the late evangelist Billy Graham's grandson, who's a devout Protestant Christian, he was a prosecutor, state prosecutor for the state of Florida, and he was the head of the sexual abuse crimes unit. Now he's a private lawyer who his expertise is in religious sexual abuse. He said that even at the height, the worst of the Catholic Church sexual abuse scandal, Protestant churches are 3 times worse. They have 3 times the amount. Okay, that was at the height. Now it's like 100 times. I mean, every day I'm reading reports on I was a Protestant for 30 years. I got all the Protestant blogs, and it's really bad what's going on in Protestantism right now. Southern Baptists having a real big issue. All these independent, non-denominationals that have no, authority whatsoever. They're really bad. Lots going on. But not even the Protestants can compare to the secular world that hates Christians. According to Cheryl Shakeshaft, she did a study for the United States Department of Education, and I did several videos on this, so I won't go in detail, but basically says from 1991 to 2000, a 9-year period, there were 290,000 students that were sexually abused in United States public school. And she's even quoted as saying it's 100 times worse than the Catholic Church's ever was. And most of the Catholic Church's abuse occurred between 1940 and 2000. In Bill Donohue's book, The Truth About Clergy Sexual Abuse, Clarifying the Facts and the Causes, from Ignatius Press, he gives the statistics. According to the FBI in 2017, according to the U.S. Department of Justice 2017 report, an estimated 10% of K through 12 students will experience sexual misconduct by school employees by the time they graduate. Compare that. Like I said, most of the abuse occurred between 1940 and 1970, 1980. But we'll bring you up to date to from 2004 to 2011. 2004, there was 22, and then it just keeps going down from that. And we'll go to 2012, 6, 2013, 7, 2014, 6, 15, 7, 2016, 2, 2017, 6, 2018, 3, 2019, 8. And then according to Boz Tjidovin, this only goes to 2019. In 2023, Boz Tjidovin, who's an expert in religious sexual abuse crimes, Billy Graham's grandson, according to Boz Tjidovin, in 2023, the Catholic Church had 3 cases of sexual abuse compared to the Chicago public school system. One city in the United States public school system had over 3,000. So one child abuse is way too many. It's the worst mortal sin you can imagine. But compared to what's going on in the Boy Scouts, in the media, in Hollywood, we're not bad at all. And according to Jason Berry, the guy who put the spotlight on the abuse, actually they based the movie Spotlight about the sexual abuse. He's an investigative journalist. He said since Pope Francis came, the crisis is over. He said the protections, the transparency, everything he did, he is head and shoulders above his predecessors. Said Pope Benedict did a good job. Pope St. John Paul II did a good job addressing this. But Pope Francis went above and beyond, where it's virtually, there's 1.3 billion Catholics in the world. There's like 400,000 Catholic priests or something like that. And, to have 3 in a year, for any institution, they're doing something right. I mean, 3, like I said, is way too many. So to me, it's obvious the conservative priests we have over the last 10 years, the lowering of sexual abuse, it all corresponds, it all kind of goes together. And why did we have so much sexual abuse and so many liberal priests before Vatican II? I mean, it wasn't like way back, in the medieval times, but in the 1900s, well, during World War II, we come to find out through all these investigations, and you can read it here. He documents everything in that book. After World War II, a lot of gay men pretended they were devout Catholics, and they lied their way into seminary. And we were overloaded with priests. A lot of people say, oh, the Catholic priesthood, we don't have enough Catholic priests. Well, Jesus talks about pruning his tree, cutting off the dead branches. And that's what God's been doing. Yeah, we have less priests, but the priests we have are solid. I would rather have quality priests than a quantity of liberal gay priests. And this is what's happening. And, in 1965, we had 0 deacons. Today, we have over 50,000 on fire deacons. These are men of God who are allowed to be married, and they serve the bishop in your church. And I have not met one deacon who wasn't on fire for God, didn't love Jesus with all his heart, soul, mind, and didn't love the church. So he's pruning the church, and he's given us quality men to lead us, deacons and priests and bishops. Now, getting off track here a little bit. So you had all these priests, and not every old priest is liberal. And I just did a video about my priest biting a girl who tried to desecrate the Eucharist, because if he would have stopped her with his hands, he would have dropped the Holy Eucharist. So he bit her, and he just retired, and he's extremely conservative theologically, and he's a Cuban American, and they are the most conservative politically as well. So it's not a broad brush. I'm just saying, even at the height, it was a small percentage of priests. I think it was less than 2% of priests, but those 2% of priests were liberal and gay. And all the investigation shows that 90% of the abuse were by gay priests going after teenage boys in the church. And Milo Yiannopoulos, the famous Catholic gay guy, said that that's normal in homosexuals. It's normal. Like, abuse is normal, drug abuse is normal, having men and teenagers is normal. This is the homosexual lifestyle. Hollywood tries to portray it as it's just love. Love is love. No, it's perverted, it's abusive, and it's a sin. And then we were infiltrated by these guys, but they're slowly dying off or they're leaving. So Vigano comes in with that crowd. He's like in his 80s. But of course, just like the liberal media portrays Republicans and Trump as the liar when they're lying right to our face every day, these guys are going to portray the good Catholics as the bad ones. And you see with Vigano, this happened, I'll show you. This was the first crack in his armor I noticed years ago. Bishop accountability. Nope, that's not the one. Where is it? Oh, I thought I left it up there. I didn't. So I'll just tell you. It's a guy named Neestat. I think maybe I wrote it down. Bishop Neestat, Minnesota. Minnesota bishop, archbishop. He was investigated because there was over a dozen affidavits saying that he was trying to sexually molest priests and seminarians, and these priests swore an affidavit, like under penalty of law, that this archbishop Neestat was having sexual relations with gay priests. They even claimed that he had relations with a Swiss guard in Rome when he was in Rome. Just a bad dude. And according to Bishop Andrew Cozzens, when Archbishop Vigano was given charge to check this out and monitor it, he shut it down. Vigano shut it down because he was friends with Neestat. And these old-timers, they all stuck together. He shut it down. And after it was shut down, the press wouldn't leave it alone, and they investigated and had more and more people come out, and Easton was forced to retire. Then right after that, Pope Benedict gave orders to Vigano to watch McCarrick. And, McCarrick wasn't allowed to travel. He said, make sure this guy doesn't travel. We're doing an investigation. We don't want him traveling. Keep your eye on him. Instead, according to the 2020 report, an investigative report by independent investigators the Vatican hired, McCarrick palled around and partied with Vigano. Vigano was supposed to watch him. He let him travel the world. And there's pictures and videos of him toasting champagne at all their rich friends' parties. And they were buddies. And you have him, Vigano, praising McCarrick, what a great leader he is this whole time. So then when this is all about to come out in 2018, the report came out in 2020, but he knew this report was going on. And then he knew all the stuff about Nice that was coming on. What's he do? He starts accusing Pope Francis, who actually laicized McCarrick once he realized what a scoundrel McCarrick was. But Vigano accuses Pope Francis. And then when this report comes out, it shows clearly that Vigano was the one protecting McCarrick. You see how these left-wingers pretend to be right-wingers, but they're really left-wingers, project what they're doing onto the people, their opponents. So he knew he was going to get in trouble for covering for Niestat, covering for McCarrick. He lied to Pope. That wasn't the first time he lied to Pope Benedict, saying he was watching and wasn't keeping him. According to his brother, who's a priest, Father Lorenzo, in a court of law, under oath, said that Vigano lied to Pope Benedict and told him he needed to stay in Rome to take care of his brother because his brother was disabled. He goes, I was in Chicago. My brother wanted to stay in Rome so he could rip me off. And the court found that Vigano robbed $2 million from his brother Lorenzo. This is an Italian court. And Lorenzo said, yeah, we inherited like $25 million. My brother's worth $20 million and he still wants more. He's a greedy SOB. And then shortly after that, a Swiss court found him guilty of stealing $200,000 from his little sister. So this guy lies to Pope Benedict, robs money from his brother, robs money from his little sister. This is the fruit of Vigano that these people are calling a hero. So now the Pope's putting pressure on all these gay priests. In fact, right out of the gate, 2013, he excommunicated Father Greg Reynolds for promoting the homosexual lifestyle and reports that he blessed gay unions. Excommunicated him right out of the gate. Shortly after that, he's talking to a group of Italian bishops. And I couldn't find this on Catholic news sites. I actually found this on a liberal rag, the Daily Beast. I try and watch everybody to see what everybody's saying. And the Daily Beast said, Pope Francis goes full homophobe. And what they were referring to was a meeting he had with Italian bishops where he said, we cannot allow homosexuals into seminary. If you see a man with a hint of femininity, don't let him in. Now, before that, the rule set by Pope, or followed by Pope St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict was, if a man had repented from his homosexual lifestyle, if he claimed he was no longer same-sex attracted, and he's been celibate for 3 years prior to entering seminary, and he, of course, takes a vow of celibacy, you could allow him in. But be very careful. The bishops must be very careful. Pope Francis changed that. Pope Francis was a lot more conservative in his view on homosexuality. He said, if someone's ever had the inclination, ever, was same-sex attracted, you cannot let him in, because he knew the report that it was a homosexual problem with the pedophilia. And he got criticized in the left-wing media, but like Catholic media, just for some reason, kind of ignored it. So where are all these gay men that used to hide in the priesthood? Well, they're going to groups that are not in full union with the Pope. They can still say they're Catholic, but they're not, they don't accept the authority of their local bishop. And one of the groups is called the SSPX. Now they'll say Rob, you're wrong. We're in union. We know Pope Francis is the Pope. We're not like the Sedevacantists, like Vigano and all those Sedevacantists says Pope Francis isn't Pope, like Altman says Pope Francis isn't Pope. No, we believe Pope Francis is a Pope. We just think he's a bad Pope. But the Code of Canon Law gives us a definition of schism right here. Canon 751. Heresy is the obstinate post-baptismal denial of some truth which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or it is likewise an obstinate doubt concerning the same. So they may say Pope Francis is the Pope, but they don't agree with all Catholic teaching that Catholics must agree with. Like, for one, they think the Novus Ordo Mass, the ordinary Mass, is intrinsically evil. And they tell their followers, if you can't get to a Latin Mass, don't go to the Novus Ordo, stay home and pray, which is telling them to commit a mortal sin. Apostasy is a total repudiation of the Christian faith. That would be totally like becoming an atheist. Schism is the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff. So if you don't submit that this is what he's saying, the conditions to get, the official conditions for SSPX to be back in union is they have to accept all of Vatican II, because they don't accept all of Vatican II, and they have to accept the new Mass as licit and valid, which their Mass is actually illicit but valid. But I have other videos on that. Schism is the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff or communion with the members of the church subject to him. They will not have communion with us in our Mass. So they are in schism according to canon law. So I gave you the statistics that in the whole Catholic Church, 1.3 billion members. That's the regular Catholic Church. 3 sexual abuse victims in year 2023, and that's been like the average for the past 10 years. The SXPX is having like 3 or 4 a year that we know about that are coming out, 3 or 4 a year, and they're just a small, tiny little group, and they weaponize, they hide behind the traditional Latin Mass. So the Latin Mass is a beautiful Mass. It's a valid Mass, but they use it as a weapon. So they'll say, and they get people that love the traditional Latin Mass to hate the Pope. They're like, he wants to take this away. No, that's not what the problem is. The problem is you not being in communion with the rest of the church. That's what the problem is. And so they will pretend like they're the conservatives and we're the liberals. And they get mad when Pope Francis says stuff like, these bishops got to stop dressing in Pravda, And I didn't know what that meant when he said that. And then I heard Milo again say, there's a lot of effeminate priests in the traditional Latin Mass, and they like to dress all fancy, and he's openly, who he is. And he's like, us gay guys, we like to be flamboyant, and wear the fancy stuff. And he says, we call them the Daughters of Trent. And I even heard Taylor Marshall laughing about the Daughters of Trent, like they just accept it. Like there's these flamboyant gay priests in the traditional Latin Mass churches. And again, I'm not knocking the traditional Latin Mass. I'm just saying how these guys, now they know they're under attack from Pope Francis, so they're congregating into these groups that aren't in communion with Pope Francis, where they don't listen. They can do what they want. Now, Bishop Williamson was one of the 4 bishops that Pope St. John Paul II excommunicated, because former Bishop Williamson was ordained by former Bishop Marcel Lefebvre, another excommunicated Catholic who called Pope St. John Paul II an Antichrist, and he died an excommunicated Catholic, and the same people that are elevating Vigano elevate him. So Vigano wants to be like him, I guess. So Bishop Williamson and other 3 bishops asked Pope Benedict to lift their excommunication, which he did. But then shortly after that, he illicitly ordained priests and was excommunicated again. So he's twice excommunicated. So then he starts his own parallel church or cult, but he takes it further than the SSPX. SSPX believe the Pope is the Pope, so they're not sedevacantists. They're in schism, but they're not sedevacantists. He says, no, the Pope is not a Pope. There hasn't been a valid Pope since Vatican II. Vatican II, though, it's SSPX will say part of Vatican II is invalid. He'll say all of Vatican II is invalid. So they're like even more extreme. So he starts this group called the Resistance. Some people refer to it as SSPX Resistance, but when I hear these Resistance guys, and I'll play a video at the end, they just call themselves the Resistance. This is the demonic cult I'm talking about. That Vigano, I'll show you, joined. So this is what's going on recently in this resistance at Vigano. This is from the bishopaccountability.org. Renegade Catholic Order in UK harbors clergy accused of sexual abuse. Go figure. A British Catholic priest who has been excommunicated twice by different popes, he's talking about ex-Bishop Williamson, is allegedly harboring clergy accused of sexual abuse in his renegade religious order. Richard Williamson, who was illicitly ordained as a bishop in 1988 by the Society of St. Pius X and later convicted of Holocaust denial by a German court. Yeah, that's another thing. This guy's a bad guy. He said this is Bishop Williamson, who Vigano just got reordained by this past year. Williamson said the Holocaust was made up by the Jews to get the world to worship the Jews. He says there's no way 6 million people died. Maybe 200,000 Jews died in concentration camps, and not one was killed in a gas chamber. So he's a total Holocaust denial. And also the French police said that him and Marcel Lefebvre hit, I believe his name was Paul Tivier. Where did I put his name? Yeah, Paul Tivier. They hit him for 9 years in a French monastery or chancery or something. And the French police said there's no way Williamson and Lefebvre didn't know this guy was there for 9 years. They claimed they were just helping a home. They thought he was a homeless guy. This guy was a Nazi war criminal who admitted to killing in gas chambers men, women, and little children. And they were hiding him from the police. Paul Tivier, look it up. Then they also, Williamson and the SSPX, this is when they were still part of the SSPX before he broke off into the more radical group, the Resistance. The SSPX held a funeral for Nazi war criminal Eric Prebeck. This was in Italy, I believe. They wanted to celebrate the life of this Nazi war criminal who also admitted to killing little children, Eric Prebeck, because these Nazis, they don't believe children are people. They don't believe they don't believe Jews are people. They think they're dogs. So they have no problem exterminating children. This is the kind of guys we're dealing with here. It's demonic, I'm telling you. So Eric Prebeck, the SSPX was planning this big funeral, and the people in Italy protested. There was going to be a riot, so the cops said you can't. And this was after, again, this was SSPX. This was after the Pope said, no, you can't celebrate this guy's life. You cannot have a funeral for this guy, public funeral. And they don't, like I said, they believe he's the Pope. They just don't think they have to listen to him when they disagree with him. I mean, what's the difference of them being a Protestant? When I was a Protestant, I believed the Pope was the Pope, but I didn't think I had to listen to him either. So it's kind of ridiculous, their argument to me. I still don't get how so many people fall for it. But so the SSPX disobeyed the Pope. I think it was Pope Benedict at the time. And they were going to have the funeral anyway until there was a riot brewing. And then finally, for their own safety, they had a private funeral celebrating the life of Nazi war criminal and child murderer Eric Prebeck. So that's what they're talking about when they say Holocaust denier. Okay, now the two Catholic SSPX priests have been accused of sexual abuse have found refuge in Williamson's breakaway movement, according to investigative documentary to be aired on Swedish television on Wednesday. The Golden Jail, made by Alan Fegan, a Swedish journalist who interviewed with Williamson about his Holocaust denial, claims that the SSPX protected priests and failed to report claims of abuse. The English priest, referred to as Father X, left the SSPX before the conclusion of the trial to join the SSPX resistance. The French priest, Father P, was found guilty and banned from working with children. These are two SSPX, SSPX is disciplining them, they're getting investigated by the SSPX, so they leave and join the SSPX resistance. And they were both filmed celebrating Mass in a resistance church. So this is the group that Vigano joined. And how do I know Vigano joined this group? And you say, well, well, what do you mean demonic? Do they worship Satan? You don't have to worship Satan to be demonic, You could be involved in New Age and be involved in something demonic. The Bible gives us a great definition of the demonic. 1 Samuel 15:23. For a sin of divination is rebellion. The word divination in Hebrew is the same word as witchcraft. In fact, the Dewey Reams Bible that traditionalists love to read uses the word witchcraft. So rebellion is the same sin as witchcraft. It's demonic. Why? Because the first rebel was Satan. He rebelled against Jesus in heaven. He rebelled. He wanted to be more powerful than God. He was a rebel. So rebellion is like the heart of every sin. It comes straight from the pit of hell. And it was rebellion that made us fall. Satan tempted Eve and Adam, and they rebelled against God. So rebellion, and you see it, and it's like the frog in the warm water. You throw the frog in boiling hot water, it's going to jump out. So you expose all these Catholics that support Vigano to the resistance demonic cult and be like, wow, that's evil. But you show them the SSPX, they're traditional. They want to get back to the tradition. This is what Martin Luther said. I was a Protestant 30 years, and that's what I used to say. All we did was bring the church back to the first century, But that's a whole nother video. So they rebel and say, oh, the new Mass is no good. They rebel and say, part of Vatican II is no good. And then it goes to full rebellion where all of Vatican II is no good. The Pope isn't even the Pope. In fact, the Pope is the Antichrist in Vigano's and Altman's own words. So how do we know? I'm sorry, I'm just a blue collar guy. I'm not going to do a split screen on the computer. I'm just going to show you on my computer. Father Chazelle from the resistance. He's a resistant priest. And so Williamson has been ordaining illicitly, like a bishop's not allowed to ordain anyone without the Pope's approval. He's been ordaining hundreds of these rebellious demonic priests, and Vigano has been ordaining 100 of them. But for Vigano to be in full communion with this resistance cult, he had to be reordained, which is blasphemy. That's like saying you're rebaptized, and they know that, so they call it conditional consecration. But it's the same thing as being reordained because they don't believe that any of the rites from Vatican II are legitimate. So they have to do it in the old rites that they believe, that they judge to be right. So this is Father Chazelle. And you see, it's funny because these schismatics always call the Pope ambiguous. And these guys watch them. I would say this guy is ambiguous. He don't want to really say, this is from like 8 months ago, but now it's all out in the open. So he was kind of being quiet, but I'll let you watch some of this video. But it's Father, if you want to look it up to watch the whole thing, or maybe I'll put it in the show notes. Father Chazelle implies Bishop Vigano was conditionally consecrated a bishop for the resistance. I'm sorry.
Necessary, that's what I can say.
Okay.
Yeah, the necessary.
Okay, you got.
So sorry for everyone else that already knows this, but is his consecration and his ordination?
Well, he's done the necessary, that's what I can say.
Talking about
the
Vigano.
necessary has been done.
This is Anthony Potter Rattred, and I wanted to share this video that I came across of Father Chazelle, and I found it quite fascinating. Because in this video, he basically says that Archbishop Vigano is a bishop of the resistance, and that he has been conditionally consecrated, I'm assuming by Bishop Williamson. So I just found this fascinating. I don't know if anybody's mentioning this, but it's basically, it seems that that Bishop Vigano has been conditionally consecrated, is working with the resistance, works closely with Bishop Williamson, he'll say in this video. And then I guess now they may have 8 bishops with the resistance. I don't know. I find this a little bit fascinating, to be honest. He was Father Shell's a little bit sheepish, I guess, when he went concerning the question of being consecrated, because maybe this is not meant to be super public, but yeah, definitely that looks like what's happening here. And I would be surprised if it did not happen. It sounds like that's what he said happened, but for the resistance to speak of him in this manner, to even work with him, I can't imagine them working with Bishop Vigano if he wasn't conditionally consecrated to be a valid and true bishop, that the resistance would even work with such a man. They're not like the SSPX, which works with Bishop, quote unquote, Bishop Hunder. They actually conditionally ordain and conditionally consecrate because they reject the new rites of Paul VI. So the fact that he's working with them says everything we need to know. So I just found this interesting. I think you guys will find this video interesting. He talks a little bit about Bishop Vigano and what he has going on with the resistance. So I'll let you guys just listen to some of the clips here and what he's saying, but I wanted to just put this out there. I thought this was interesting, that it looks like Archbishop Vigano seems to have been conditionally consecrated. I'm assuming by Bishop Williamson, since they apparently hang out a lot. So just enjoy the clips. Ave Maria.
Sorry to go back to Bishop Vigano again.
Yes.
Did I understand correctly that he's actually a bishop of the resistance?
Yes.
So has he made some sort of declaration? Or
Doesn't need to. He needs to agree with our position. That's all he needs.
so how are we to know that he actually agrees with our position and doesn't hold with SSPX? Or...
What he writes.
Okay.
So the Dominicans in Avrier really praise what he's saying, and Bishop Williamson also praises what he says and his stand. And then we read what he says. That's pretty much the same thing as we say, that Pope Francis is a heretic. He calls him Bergoglio, but he's not a sedevacantist either. But he calls a spade, a heretic, a heretic. If you are a heretic, you must be fought until you return to tradition. So he fights the conciliar church. He hates the new mass. He condemns Vatican II. What else do we want?
He used to say the new right at some point.
Thanks to Francis, his eyes opened. It's a Macaric scandal in the US. When he was papal nuncio, there was a cover-up for pedophilia, and that gave him a shock. He realized that they were after the Catholic. They wanted to destroy the Catholic Church. He saw a willful intent to destroy the Catholic Church. And so we realized that Vatican II is also the self-demolition of the Church. The new Mass is also the demolition of the Church. And the new everything else. So things fell into their place. And then he realized that he was very late in the fight. So he's trying to catch up by being as loud as he can. Louder than Bishop Williamson even now.
So sorry if everyone else already knows this, but is his consecration and his ordination?
Well, he's done the necessary, that's all I can say. Yeah, the necessary has been done. Yeah, so... And then he uses his weight. Because Bishop Williamson is very nice, we like him very much. But he has the weight that corresponds to our circles. Whereas Vigano, we are flanking the enemy with Vigano. Yeah. Perhaps next time I come to Europe, I'll visit Archbishop Vigano, hopefully, and pay my respects to him and congratulate him for his courage and speaking loud, bishing around, doing what a bishop does. And it's you could say it's a major breakthrough this year. That's the best news of the year. as far as we are concerned. This is what we are praying for. This is how the crisis will end, by the return to tradition. We always talked about a return to tradition. And so in Archbishop Vigano, we have what we desire. We lament the fact that the Society of St. Pius X does not rejoice with us. They should rejoice at the return to tradition of a Novus Ordo bishop, who is condemning in the strongest term Freemason.
So he goes on to talk about, the reporter asked him about Bishop Strickland, and he said he's not there yet, but Vigano is in his ear, and we're trying to get him over to our side. And also he said Vigano was not a sedevacanist yet. He later became a sedevacanist when he said Pope Francis is not the Pope. Sedevacanist is just Latin for the seat is empty. And he said we're franking. I think what he meant was we're flanking the enemy, us Catholics, on all sides, and Vigano is a better fighter. I guess Williamson is old. He's saying he's very nice, but he doesn't have the weight. Vigano has the weight because he has the #1 Catholic YouTuber, Taylor Marshall, promoting him. He has Kennedy Hall, pretty popular guy, promoting him. So he has the weight. He can convince people to leave the church and join the resistance, is basically what he's saying. Vigano has the weight. So Vigano is being used by the devil the same way Martin Luther was used by the devil. Martin Luther said the same thing. We want to go back to tradition. You know, Lefebvre said the same thing. We want to go back to tradition. When in fact, Vatican II, and I had a great priest on, Father Blake Britton, wrote a book called Reclaiming Vatican II. When Vatican II came out, a lot of liberal theologians convinced people of things that really weren't taught in Vatican II. So a lot of priests were confused at the beginning, and that's another thing that made these priests more conservative. When they read Vatican II for themselves, and they realized Vatican II actually did go back to tradition, back to tradition of the first century, when the Christians took communion in the hand, back in the first century, where the Mass was said in the vernacular, so average blue-collar guys and fishermen could understand it. They went back to traditions and started ordaining permanent deacons. They weren't doing this for a while. St. Stephen, St. Philip, St. Francis, these were great deacons. And again, now we have that again. We did go back to tradition, but they like the tradition from 500 years ago, not the traditions from 2,000 years ago. And their traditions are good too, but it's not what the church is calling us to now. They're calling us to go back to the 1st and 2nd century. It's just like they evangelized then. This is a new evangelization, and it's bringing in thousands of Protestants like myself. It's working. Since 1965 to today, the church has doubled in size. It's a fact. Google it. For the past 10 years, just happened, Pope Francis was Pope. The church has outpaced the growth of the world. The growth of the world was 9.1%, and the church growth was 10%. And you might not think that's very impressive, but I was a Protestant, and those churches are dying. The past 10 years, I think the #1 Protestant, the largest Protestant denomination, Southern Baptist, lost like 4 million members. The Methodists, the second largest, lost like half of their members. So, don't believe the lie, never go against the church, stay in union with the Pope. If you don't understand why the Pope does things, pray, but don't publicly talk bad about the Pope. Would you publicly talk bad about your father? I mean, that's disloyal. That's low life, man. That's nasty. It's not good. So never go against the church. Love the Pope and stay Catholic.